You're listening to Trace Hunt Radio. We explore the darkest chapters of true crime, unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and the twisted minds behind them. Follow the blood, chase the clues, uncover the truth. Stay sharp. The hunt begins now.
They say a painting can capture a soul, but what if it also hides a crime? In a quiet estate, untouched for decades, art restorers uncovered a portrait that seemed ordinary at first glance, a smiling widow painted in rich oils, her gaze following viewers across the room. But as the canvas was cleaned, cracks began to reveal another image beneath. The same woman, but this time her lips twisted in terror, a cord drawn tight around her throat. The discovery shocked experts and detectives alike. How could such a brutal truth be embedded in a painting? And more chillingly, who had painted it and why? What began as an art restoration turned into a murder investigation spanning generations, unraveling the story of a woman's silence not just in life, but buried in brushstrokes. This is not just about art history. It's about obsession, betrayal, and a killer who thought he had outsmarted time. The canvas became both a confession and a gravestone, carrying the evidence no one was ever supposed to see. Tonight, we reopen The Murder Hidden in Oil and Canvas. Step into the gallery of shadows, where paint becomes proof, and a widow's silent scream finally breaks free. Chapter 1. The discovery of the widow's portrait. The air inside Whitcombe Manor was heavy with dust and time. The estate had stood abandoned for more than a century, its windows boarded up, its halls echoing only with the occasional scurrying of mice. But now, under the watchful eyes of conservators and historians, the silence was finally broken. Among the relics collected from the crumbling estate was a portrait, a full-length oil painting of a woman known only in the archives as the Whitcombe Widow. At first glance, the painting seemed ordinary, even elegant. It depicted a woman in a black satin gown, standing beside a velvet chair, her gloved hands folded neatly in front of her. Her expression was serene, almost warm, as though she were at peace with her solitude. But something about the painting unsettled the team. Her eyes, a sharp shade of hazel, seemed too alive, following them from every corner of the room. The canvas was selected for restoration, a process intended to peel away the grime and smoke damage that had dulled its colors over decades. Lead conservator Margaret Hensley began her delicate work in the dimly lit restoration studio, slowly applying a solvent-soaked swab across the surface of the canvas. Inch by inch, the original vibrancy of the oils began to return. The deep blacks of the dress, the pale softness of the widow's skin. And then, one evening, as Margaret leaned close under the lamp's glare, she noticed something strange. Beneath the upper layers of paint, faint cracks revealed lines that didn't quite match the portrait's composition. The corner of the widow's jaw seemed sharper, her neck thinner, almost strained. Margaret paused, frowning. She carefully removed another layer, her hands trembling with each stroke. What emerged stopped her cold. The smile that once curved on the widow's lips had twisted, warped into something grotesque. Her eyes, once gentle, now widened in terror, and across her throat, faint but unmistakable, was the impression of a cord drawn tight, her skin bruised beneath the oil pigments. Margaret dropped her swab, her breath quickening. She called over her assistant Daniel, who stared in disbelief. "There's another painting underneath," he whispered. "It's her, but she's dead." Word spread quickly. The team gathered, hushed voices filling the studio. No one dared to touch the canvas further that night. The portrait, once just another relic, was now a crime scene. The following day, forensic art experts were brought in. Using advanced imaging technology, they confirmed Margaret's fears. The widow's serene likeness had been painted over a far more disturbing truth: a hidden portrait of the same woman strangled to death. It was no coincidence. The brushstrokes were deliberate, meticulous. Whoever had painted the second image had done so with intent, capturing every detail of her final, gasping moment. The artist had immortalized her death, then concealed it beneath a mask of serenity. The discovery stunned not only the restoration team, but also the Historical Society overseeing Whitcombe Manor's reopening. Local newspapers caught wind of the story, dubbing it the widow's secret portrait. But the questions that followed were darker than any headline. Who was the widow? Why had her death been hidden in paint? And most chilling of all, had the artist confessed to her murder through his art? As the painting was carefully stored under lock and key, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that the widow was staring at her still. Not with serenity, but with a desperate plea. The painting was no longer art, it was evidence. And for the first time in over 100 years, the widow's story was about to be told. Chapter 2. The widow's life and disappearance. The name of the woman in the painting, long buried in brittle records and whispers of gossip, was Eleanor Whitcombe. Born Eleanor Davies in 1862, she came from a family of modest wealth, her father a merchant, her mother a schoolmistress. By all accounts, Eleanor was strikingly beautiful, a woman whose quiet poise belied a steel will. Her marriage to Charles Whitcombe, a landowner nearly 20 years her senior, was seen as a leap into fortune and status. Some called it advantageous, others whispered it was a cage. Whitcombe Manor was the jewel of the countryside, a sprawling estate of manicured gardens, high-ceilinged halls, and a grand ballroom that glittered with candlelight during the family's frequent gatherings. Eleanor quickly became the lady of the manor, adored by some of the staff for her kindness, but regarded with suspicion by others who thought her ambitions were sharper than her husband realized. Yet beneath the surface of her privileged life, cracks began to show. Letters discovered later in local archives suggest that Eleanor often felt isolated within the marriage. Charles was stern, distant, and preoccupied with maintaining the family's reputation. Rumors hinted at arguments. Eleanor wanting to travel, Charles insisting she fulfill her duties at home. More troubling still, Eleanor seemed to keep company with friends her husband disapproved of, including artists, writers, and bohemians who frequented the city. Her fascination with art was well documented. She sat for several portraits, each by different painters, though only one would later be infamous: the oil portrait by Edmund Callaway. Callaway was not a household name, but among the local artistic circles, he was known for his obsessive attention to detail. He captured not just likenesses, but the essence of his subjects. Some described his work as too vivid, too piercing, as though the eyes of his portraits held secrets no one else could see. When Eleanor agreed to sit for Callaway, she was already regarded as a woman of mystery. Her beauty had become a symbol of Whitcombe's prestige, yet those close to her confided that she often seemed restless, as though she was searching for something more. It was during these sittings, many believe, that she began confiding in Callaway, revealing her fears and frustrations. Whether or not their relationship ever crossed into scandal, no one could prove. But whispers persisted long after. Then, in the autumn of 1891, Eleanor vanished. The disappearance was sudden and shocking. One evening, She attended a gathering at Whitcombe Manor. By morning, she was gone. Charles Whitcombe informed the authorities that his wife had taken ill and retreated to visit family in the city. Weeks later, when no such family visit could be confirmed, he quietly announced that Eleanor had chosen to leave, perhaps to start a new life abroad. No official missing persons report was ever filed, though neighbors raised questions. Why had Charles been so quick to dismiss her absence? Why did the staff whisper of a quarrel that very night? The gossip swelled when Callaway the painter abruptly left town. His career stalled, his whereabouts unknown. His last known work, the portrait of Eleanor Whitcombe. What truly happened to Eleanor remained a mystery, buried under generations of silence. Officially, she was presumed to have abandoned her life, though no evidence supported it. Unofficially, whispers of foul play haunted the estate for decades. Some suspected Charles, citing his cold demeanor and his sudden control of Eleanor's dowry. Others pointed to Callaway, suggesting a jealous obsession had turned violent. But none had proof. None, that is, until Margaret Hensley's solvent brush revealed the strangled woman beneath the paint. For over a century, Eleanor's name had been little more than a footnote in the annals of Whitcombe Manor. Now, her face, twisted in terror beneath the oils, demanded to be remembered. The widow had not simply disappeared. She had been erased. And somewhere within that canvas lay the first true clue to her fate. Chapter 3. The Artist's Signature. If Eleanor Whitcombe's life was a mystery, then Edmund Callaway was the ghost who haunted its margins. His name appeared sporadically in records, often tied to commissions for local gentry, yet never achieving the acclaim he longed for. Callaway was described in letters and journals of the time as an intense man with eyes that stared too long and hands that trembled when idle. To many, he was a man burdened by genius and ruin in equal measure. Born in 1854, Callaway had trained under respected portraitists in London before returning to the countryside, where wealthy families offered steady work. But unlike his peers, he was not content to simply flatter his subjects. His portraits were unnervingly lifelike, capturing subtle emotions that others overlooked. One critic once remarked, "Callaway paints as though he is unmasking the soul." Whether or not the sitter wishes to be revealed, it was this reputation that drew Eleanor to him. While her husband Charles preferred stiff, formal depictions to display on the manor walls, Eleanor craved something different: honesty. In her letters, discovered years later in a trunk hidden at the estate, she wrote of wanting to be seen as I truly am, not as I am expected to be. Callaway, it seemed, was the only man who could grant her that wish. The sittings began in the summer of 1890. At first, they were ordinary sessions. Eleanor seated by the window in Callaway's dimly lit studio, her hands resting in her lap as he studied her features. But soon, the relationship deepened. Witnesses recalled seeing Eleanor visit him at odd hours, sometimes lingering long after a sitting should have ended. For Callaway, the line between artist and admirer blurred dangerously. He confided in friends that Eleanor was a muse, a vision, a creature too rare for the life she has been forced to endure. But as the weeks passed, his work took on a darker edge. Beneath layers of paint, he began experimenting with hidden sketches, ghostly outlines that only he could see. Art historians examining his recovered works later noted recurring motifs: eyes that looked over shoulders, shadows curling like ropes, figures that seemed caught between serenity and fear. It was as if Callaway was practicing, rehearsing for a confession he could not speak aloud. And then came the portrait of Eleanor, the one now infamous as the widow's portrait. Forensic analysis revealed what no one had suspected in his lifetime that Callaway had painted two portraits in one. First, he rendered Eleanor in her final moments, strangled, her eyes wide with terror. Then, over that macabre image, he painted her serene likeness, a mask to conceal the horror beneath. But why? Experts debated. Some argued that Callaway was tormented by knowledge of her death, perhaps even complicit in it, and sought to preserve the truth in secret. Others believed he may have killed her himself, driven by obsession and jealousy, immortalizing his crime on canvas. Still others speculated that the hidden image was a symbolic expression, a way of portraying the suffocation Eleanor endured within her marriage. What made the mystery even more sinister was a detail uncovered during the restoration. Callaway's signature, scrawled not at the bottom where tradition dictated, but beneath the layers of paint, hidden near Eleanor's throat in the strangled version. It was a deliberate choice, as though he wished his name to be tied forever not to the serene widow, but to the murdered woman. Margaret Hensley, examining the portrait under infrared light, felt a chill run down her spine when she saw it. The letters were crude, but clear. E. Callaway, a mark of authorship, or perhaps a mark of guilt. In the years after Eleanor's disappearance, Callaway vanished from society. Some said he fled to France, others whispered he took his own life in shame. No grave was ever found, no obituary printed. He became, like Eleanor, a shadow, erased from history except for the brushstrokes he left behind. But now, more than a century later, his ghost had returned through pigment and canvas. The widow's portrait was not only a relic of art, it was a message, a puzzle, a silent scream preserved by the very man who may have ended her life. As investigators delved deeper into Callaway's surviving works, more patterns emerged. A sketchbook found in a private collection depicted ropes, bruises, and women with eyes full of dread. One chilling note scrawled in the margins read, "Only in death do they belong wholly to me." Was this the rambling of an unstable artist or the confession of a murderer? For those staring into Eleanor's painted eyes today, the answer feels disturbingly close. The portrait was no longer just art, it was evidence, and Callaway's hand was written all over it. Chapter 4. The investigation reopens. When Margaret Hensley revealed the hidden image beneath Eleanor Whitcombe's portrait, what had begun as a routine restoration became a turning point in a century-old mystery. For the first time, tangible evidence of foul play emerged. The serene widow, long thought to have simply vanished, was recast as a murder victim. Her death recorded not in official archives, but in oil and pigment. Word spread quickly. The Whitcombe family descendants, once indifferent to the painting's fate, suddenly found their legacy under scrutiny. Newspapers revived the case with headlines such as "The Widow Returns," "Murder in the Paint," and "Canvas of Secrets." Local historians, archivists, and even law enforcement began to ask the question that had haunted Whitcombe Manor for more than a century. Who killed Eleanor? The official investigation, long dormant, was quietly reopened. Cold case detectives joined forces with forensic art experts, hoping to bridge the gap between 19th century silence and modern science. Their task was daunting. There was no body, no crime scene, no surviving witnesses. All that remained was a portrait, brittle letters, and the manor itself. The first step was to authenticate the hidden image. Using infrared reflectography, multispectral imaging, and X-ray fluorescence, forensic analysts mapped every layer of the painting. The results were undeniable. Beneath the surface layer lay a second portrait, unmistakably depicting a woman strangled. The face, when compared to photographs of Eleanor from the period, matched perfectly. Forensic artists confirmed that the bruising around the neck, the widened eyes, and the slack mouth suggested death by asphyxiation. This was no accidental sketch. It was a record of violence. Next came the question of Calloway's role. His hidden signature, etched near Eleanor's throat, became a focal point. Was it an admission of guilt, or a way to implicate himself as the witness to a crime he could not report? Investigators turned to surviving documents, contracts, letters, journals. Among them, a series of correspondences between Charles Whitcombe and Calloway surfaced. In one letter, dated only weeks before Eleanor's disappearance, Charles demanded that the artist return certain unfinished works and cease visiting the manor. Another letter, unsigned but found in Calloway's abandoned sketchbook, contained a chilling line. "She is suffocating, and he does not see. But I see. I always see." The ambiguity left detectives torn. Was Calloway describing Eleanor's stifled marriage, or was it a coded confession of her literal strangulation? Attention soon shifted to Whitcombe Manor itself. Ground-penetrating radar was used on the estate grounds, revealing disturbances in the soil near the old gardens. Though the digs turned up only animal remains and broken pottery, the discoveries rekindled speculation. Could Eleanor's body have been buried elsewhere on the property, long since lost to time? The investigation expanded further when art collectors began to come forward. Several previously unknown Calloway sketches surfaced, each darker than the last. One drawing showed a figure kneeling, hands bound, a man's shadow looming over her. Another depicted a woman sprawled at the foot of a staircase, her features eerily similar to Eleanor's. These works were not signed, but experts confirmed the style was Calloway's. To some, it was further proof of his guilt. To others, a sign of his obsession with documenting violence he may have only witnessed. Meanwhile, genealogists traced the descendants of both Charles and Eleanor. From Eleanor's side, a great-great-grandniece provided family letters suggesting Eleanor had once planned to run away. From Charles's side, a journal written by his brother mentioned a disgrace in the family, one that had been painted into permanence. Neither record solved the mystery, but both added new dimensions to Eleanor's story, torn between escape and entrapment. The most compelling evidence came when forensic experts analyzed Calloway's paints. Microscopic samples taken from the underpainting revealed traces of fibers embedded in the pigment, threads of fabric consistent with 19th century women's dresses. How such fibers had become trapped in the paint was unclear. Did Calloway deliberately mix them in, a grotesque token of possession? Or had they clung to him during Eleanor's final moments, later transferred to his canvas? By now, the case had grown into a media storm. True crime documentaries clamored to feature the widow's portrait. Debates raged online. Was Edmund Calloway a murderer, a witness, or merely an artist consumed by obsession? And what of Charles, the stoic husband with both motive and opportunity? Though the investigation could not produce a definitive culprit, it achieved something just as powerful. It gave Eleanor Whitcombe back her voice. She was no longer the vanished lady of Whitcombe Manor, dismissed as a runaway or a scandal. She was recognized as a victim, her suffering immortalized in oils by the one man who either loved her too much or betrayed her completely. The reopening of the case also inspired broader conversations about art as evidence. Could a painting truly serve as testimony? Could brushstrokes stand in for a witness statement? Forensic scholars argued yes. Just as fingerprints and DNA capture traces of presence, art can capture intent, memory, even confession. By the close of the reopened inquiry, no charges were filed. But the legacy of the case had changed forever. Whitcombe Manor became a site of fascination. The portrait, a macabre artifact displayed under glass. Visitors stared into Eleanor's layered eyes, some seeing beauty, others terror. And as modern detectives filed away their reports, one conclusion seemed inescapable. Somewhere between the brush and the canvas, between love and obsession, between silence and confession, lay the truth. A truth Eleanor had carried into eternity, hidden beneath paint for over a century. The murder had not been solved, but it had been remembered. And for the first time in 130 years, justice felt closer than silence. Chapter 5. Legacy of the Portrait. The Whitcombe widow's portrait no longer belonged to a dusty archive or the forgotten wing of a decaying estate. It had transformed into something greater, a bridge between art and evidence, beauty and horror, past and present. The discovery of the hidden painting altered not only Eleanor Whitcombe's legacy, but also the way society viewed the silent stories preserved within works of art. The portrait was unveiled to the public at the Whitcombe Historical Society's museum, displayed in a specially crafted glass case with advanced preservation controls. For the first time in over a century, the world could look into Eleanor's painted eyes, both versions of them. Museum curators used digital imaging to create a layered display, allowing visitors to toggle between the serene widow and the strangled victim beneath. The effect was chilling. Audiences gasped as they watched the transformation, as if the widow herself were pulling back a mask to reveal the truth. Crowds came in droves. True crime enthusiasts, art historians, students, and tourists flocked to the exhibition, each hoping to catch a glimpse of what many called a painted confession. Reporters described the unveiling as equal parts gallery and courtroom. Visitors left shaken, whispering to one another that they felt the widow was still asking for justice. The portrait's fame inspired documentaries, podcasts, and books. Some storytellers emphasized the romantic tragedy of Eleanor, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, immortalized by a painter who adored her. Others leaned into the darker theory that Edmund Callaway had killed her, sealing his crime beneath layers of oil. Conspiracy forums filled with speculation. Was Charles the true killer, commissioning the cover-up to protect his reputation? Or had Callaway staged it all, weaving a performance of innocence through his art? Regardless of theories, the portrait accomplished something remarkable. It forced the world to remember Eleanor Whitcombe not as a name in a ledger, but as a human being. Her story became a rallying point for historians advocating for forgotten women of the Victorian era, whose lives and deaths were too often dismissed as footnotes. University lectures cited Eleanor as a case study in how art could serve as historical testimony. Law enforcement training programs even used the painting as an example of unconventional evidence, a reminder that truth can be hidden in unexpected places. But the legacy extended beyond academia. Families descended from both the Whitcombes and Callaway found themselves grappling with the past. For some descendants, the reopening of the case felt like a curse, dragging ancestral shame back into the light. For others, it felt like vindication, proof that Eleanor's disappearance had always been more sinister than gossip suggested. Interviews with surviving relatives revealed a mix of emotions: sorrow, pride, defensiveness, and unease. Eleanor's great-great-grandniece, Margaret Foster, became a vocal advocate for the widow's recognition as a murder victim. Standing before the portrait during its unveiling, she gave a statement to the press. She was silenced in life, but in death, she speaks. This painting is not just art. It is her testimony. "We must listen." The quote went viral, further fueling public fascination. Soon, the story of the widow expanded into cultural symbolism. Plays and novels reimagined her as a Gothic heroine. Artists painted tributes, layering serene and terrified faces into new works. Even fashion designers incorporated black veils and strangulation motifs into avant-garde collections, blurring the line between homage and exploitation. Yet, not everyone celebrated the portrait's fame. Critics argued that displaying such a personal, horrific image was a form of sensationalism. Was it right to exhibit a woman's murder, even one painted more than a century ago, as entertainment? The museum responded carefully, framing the exhibition as both a memorial and a pursuit of justice. They included extensive educational panels, ensuring that visitors understood Eleanor as a person, not just a spectacle. Despite the controversies, the portrait's influence endured. Scholars began re-examining other artworks from the era, scanning canvases with advanced imaging to uncover hidden layers. While most revealed only preliminary sketches or minor adjustments, the possibility of uncovering more sinister secrets electrified the art world. Were there other crimes hidden beneath varnish and paint, waiting to be exposed? For Margaret Hensley, the conservator who had first revealed Eleanor's hidden suffering, the experience was transformative. She often recalled the moment the bruises appeared under her swab, the terror frozen in Eleanor's eyes. It haunted her dreams, but it also ignited a new purpose. She began lecturing internationally about the responsibility of art conservators, not just to preserve beauty, but to uncover truth. Every canvas, she told her audiences, is a witness. We must learn to listen. Meanwhile, the debate over the true killer remained unresolved. No amount of technology could conclusively identify whether it was Charles, the husband with motive and power, or Calloway, the artist with obsession and access. Theories ebbed and flowed with every new analysis, but the absence of a body or definitive confession left the case forever open. And yet, perhaps the ambiguity was part of the portrait's power. It forced the public to wrestle with uncertainty, to stare into Eleanor's layered gaze and confront the uncomfortable truth that justice is not always neat, that stories are sometimes painted in shadow as much as in light. In the end, Eleanor Whitcombe achieved in death what she had been denied in life, a voice that could not be silenced. Her portrait, once locked away in an abandoned manor, now stood as both artwork and indictment. Every visitor who looked upon her face became a witness, carrying her story forward. Her legacy was not of silence, but of revelation. And in the stillness of the gallery, as the lights dimmed at closing time, it was said that her eyes followed you still, not pleading anymore, but watching, ensuring that no one would ever again turn away.